Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever stopped and wondered what exactly is written in that tiny, microscopic code that makes you, well, you? Today, we're going to embark on a really fascinating journey into the world of our biological instruction manuals. We're talking about decoding our genetic blueprints. We'll explore how they shape our health, our families, and our futures, all through the incredible lens of genetic counseling. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our agenda for today. First, understanding genetic counseling. Then, who should seek counseling, the step-by-step process, decoding inheritance patterns, and finally, ethics, limits, and the future of it all. So I want you to just think about your own family for a second, right? We all have those stories passed down through the generations. Maybe it's a specific physical trait, or, perhaps it's a whisper of a health condition that just seems to pop up again and again in aunts, uncles, or grandparents. It is completely natural to have curiosities and, yeah, sometimes anxieties about what you might have inherited or what you might pass on to your own kids. What if your family tree held the literal secret to your future health? Well, that is exactly the question genetic counseling seeks to answer. Section 1. Understanding genetic counseling. And it is about way more than just DNA. Often when we hear the word genetics, we instantly picture cold, clinical laboratories and massive spreadsheets of complex data. But genetic counseling is fundamentally a communication process. Yes, absolutely, trained healthcare professionals are looking at hard medical facts. But their main goal? It's helping individuals and families understand the medical, the psychological, and the familial implications of genetic diseases and testing. They're actually there to provide emotional support right alongside the hard science. It's about translation and compassion, just as much as it is about chromosomes. Moving on to Section 2. Who should seek counseling? Let's identify the need. So it's one thing to know what genetic counseling actually is, but who exactly needs it? Well, this table brilliantly illustrates how the scope of this field literally covers the entire human lifespan. For instance, you've got preconception counseling, which happens before a pregnancy even occurs to evaluate reproductive risks. Then there's prenatal counseling for expectant parents to assess fetal risks. Fast forward a bit, and after birth, pediatric counseling focuses on infants or children with developmental delays or suspected disorders. Then, later in life, adult counseling helps folks at risk for diseases that develop over time. And there's also cancer counseling, which specifically evaluates hereditary cancer risks, things like inherited breast or colorectal cancers. Now, within those different life stages, there are specific real-world triggers that usually prompt a visit to a counselor. For family planning, this often includes advanced maternal age, which is typically defined as 35 years or older, or, a heartbreaking history of recurrent miscarriages. It's also highly recommended for consanguineous marriages, which just means couples who are closely related by blood. During a pregnancy, abnormal findings on a routine ultrasound can absolutely trigger a referral. And of course, a known family history of inherited diseases, that is a prime reason to seek guidance at literally any stage of life. Section 3. The genetic counseling process. Let's walk through your step-by-step journey. I know walking into a new medical environment can be super intimidating, but the clinical process here is actually highly structured. Step 1 always begins with history collection, so detailing your personal and family medical history, your ethnic background, and any previous pregnancies. Step 2 is risk assessment, where the counselor estimates the probability of an inherited condition based on your family pedigree. Only then do we hit Step 3, which is genetic testing, if it's appropriate. That could be carrier screening or diagnostic testing. Then Step 4 is interpretation. This is where the counselor breaks down those test findings, the disease risks, and even the limitations of the test itself. That leads us directly into Step 5, decision-making. Here you get the support to make healthcare or reproductive choices that actually align with your personal values. And finally, Step 6 is follow-up, just ensuring you have the referrals or medical management you're going to need going forward. I actually want to pause right here for just a second to really emphasize this takeaway. The ultimate goal of this entire 6-step journey, it isn't just data collection or, handing you a dense lab report. The goal is to help individuals and families make informed medical and reproductive decisions through education, support, and evidence-based guidance. Honestly, the goal is entirely about empowering you. Section 4. Decoding inheritance patterns. Basically, reading the blueprint. So, now that we understand the human side of the process, it's time to learn the grammar of your biological instruction manual. During a session, you are very likely going to hear terms about how diseases are passed down. So the crucial point here is understanding the difference in the required dosage of a gene to cause an issue. Check this out. With autosomal dominant inheritance, it only takes one single copy of an altered gene from one parent to cause the disorder. However, with autosomal recessive inheritance, a person needs to inherit two altered copies of the gene, one from each parent, for the disorder to actually develop. It is a huge difference and completely changes how disease risk is calculated for a family. But, the blueprint has other rules too. For example, there's X-linked inheritance, where the altered gene sits on the X chromosome. And because males typically only have one X chromosome, these disorders often affect them much more severely. There is also mitochondrial inheritance, which is super fascinating because these genetic changes are passed down exclusively through maternal DNA, meaning from the mother. Counselors use these exact patterns to assess risks for very real familial conditions, things you've probably heard of like cystic fibrosis, Huntington's disease, sickle cell disease, and Down syndrome. Understanding the pattern is literally the key to understanding the risk. Which brings us to Section 5, Ethics, Limits, and the Future. Navigating tomorrow. As our ability to read our genetic blueprint accelerates, we find ourselves having to navigate some pretty profound ethical questions. As incredibly powerful as this tool is, it's vital we recognize its hurdles. Like, not every test gives a crystal clear yes or no. Sometimes testing reveals what they call variants of uncertain significance, which basically means we see a change in the DNA, but science doesn't quite know yet if it's harmful or totally harmless. And that uncertainty, it can trigger immense psychological and emotional anxiety. Furthermore, the absolute necessity of patient privacy is paramount here because there are very valid concerns out there about genetic discrimination. Finally, we've got to acknowledge that cost and access remain major barriers in a lot of regions, meaning this vital information just isn't equally available to everyone quite yet. But don't lose hope, because those limitations are rapidly being tackled by some mind-blowing recent advances. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is just how fast we are moving. We are standing right on the edge of a medical revolution. Next-generation sequencing is allowing us to read DNA faster and cheaper than ever before. Telegenetics is breaking down geographical access barriers, literally bringing counselors directly to patients' living rooms over video. And perhaps most incredibly, AI-assisted interpretation is starting to help scientists quickly decode those tricky, uncertain variants we just talked about, seamlessly integrating all this data into truly personalized precision medicine. It's a real game changer. Ultimately, genetic counseling bridges the gap between insanely complex genomic science and our most intimate human experiences. It empowers families, it prevents disease, and it shines a light into the biological unknowns of our family trees. Which leaves us with one final, deeply personal thought. As these tools become more advanced and a whole lot more accessible, with the future of genomics quite literally at our fingertips, how much of your blueprint are you ready to read? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope it sparked a new curiosity about the incredible microscopic code that makes you who you are.